After Brock Lesnar's emotional loss at SummerSlam, WWE has reportedly made a shocking decision about the Beast's future. The latest reports suggest his time with the company could be coming to an end. Let me break it down. Brock Lesnar's hometown crowd got exactly what they didn't want to see. The Beast incarnate stepped into hell in a cell against Oba Femi on the first night of SummerSlam 2026. In Minneapolis, in the building that sits a few miles from where Lesnar wrestled at the University of Minnesota. And he lost. Oba Femi defeated Brock Lesnar in the main event of the Night 1 show, competing in his career's first ever WWE main roster premium live event main event. And despite taking severe damage, Femi stood strong and pinned Lesnar to secure the victory. Then came the moment everyone's still talking about. Oba won after hitting a fall from Grace powerbomb on Brock. And after the loss, the Beast incarnate hugged Oba in the middle of the ring and raised his arm in victory before taking the microphone. This wasn't a guy storming off angry. This was a guy handing over the torch on camera in front of thousands of people who'd waited years to see him one more time, and he didn't stop there. Following the match, the Beast incarnate showered Femi with praise and announced him as the company's future while declaring himself as the past. Think about that phrase for a second. He didn't say, "I'll see you next time." He didn't tease a rematch. He called himself the past, out loud on the microphone in Minnesota. Naturally, the internet did what the internet does. Within minutes, clips of the hug, the raised arm, and that line about being the past were everywhere. Fans started planning tribute posts. Wrestling reporters started filing "Is this it?" stories before the ring had even been cleared for the next match. It had all the hallmarks of a farewell, the kind WWE has scripted before for legends walking away. But here's where things get interesting, because Triple H didn't let the moment sit unanswered for long. Later, at the WWE SummerSlam Night 1 post-show, Triple H conducted a press conference, where he opened up and addressed Lesnar's retirement status. This is the man who runs WWE's creative direction now, the person who would actually know if Lesnar's run was truly finished. And instead of confirming the goodbye everyone had just watched, he brought up history. He pointed out that Lesnar seemingly retired at WWE WrestleMania 42, before making a comeback a few weeks later, adding, "You saw Brock in whatever way he retired a few months ago, and then come back and do this." Read between those lines, Triple H wasn't saying Lesnar is done. He was reminding everyone that Lesnar has done this exact routine before, walked away with all the theatrics, and then walked right back in. Now let's bring John Cena into this, because Cena's fingerprints are all over this story too. Months before SummerSlam even happened, Cena had already put the idea in everyone's head that this was where Lesnar's story would end. Cena had said, "You have to figure out who gets the shine that night, and if in his return, again, only my perspective. This attraction we are going to build until he goes into the sunset, which is, I think, in Minnesota." Before clarifying, or creatively, it's very soon. Cena wasn't guessing randomly. He just finished his own retirement tour. He knew exactly what a WWE farewell run looks like from the inside, and he was pointing straight at Lesnar, straight at Minnesota, straight at this exact weekend. So you've got Femi's opponent handing him the win and the praise in the ring. You've got Cena months earlier, all but circling this date on the calendar. And you've got the crowd noise, the tribute posts, the sense that professional wrestling had just witnessed something final. That's three separate voices from three separate corners of the wrestling world, all pointing the same direction. Now bring in a fourth. Dave Meltzer, who covers this industry closer than almost anyone alive, had already reported months in advance that the current plan is for Lesnar to officially retire at SummerSlam later this year. That's not a fan theory. That's a reporter with direct lines into WWE's internal planning, saying the promotion itself had this specific date targeted as the end. So why, in the middle of all that agreement, did Triple H choose the post-show press conference to bring up Lesnar's history of retiring and then unretiring? Because there's a piece of this puzzle that hadn't caught up with the crowd yet. Behind the scenes, in the days leading into that Hell in a Cell match, a very different message had already started circulating among people who talked to WWE directly. And it directly contradicts the mood everyone felt when Lesnar raised Femi's arm and called himself the past. That's the tension sitting underneath this whole story right now. On one side, you have the visual, the hug, the microphone, the goodbye. On the other, you have the people closest to WWE's actual plans, hinting the company isn't ready to let the Beast go just yet. And to understand which one wins out, you have to go back further than this one match. You have to go back to the last time Lesnar supposedly said goodbye, because it turns out this isn't the first time Minneapolis, or a microphone, or a devastating loss made everyone think Brock Lesnar was finished for good. If you felt like you'd seen this movie before, that's because you had. Months before SummerSlam at WrestleMania 42, Brock Lesnar walked into a match against Oba Femi. As the guy nobody expected to lose, he was the legend. Femi was the newcomer everyone was still getting to know. And Femi won anyway. Femi soundly defeated the future Hall of Famer at WrestleMania 42. What happened after that match is what really got people talking. Lesnar didn't just walk backstage in silence. He left his MMA gloves and boots in the ring, before embracing Paul Heyman and waving to the crowd. If you know anything about how retirements get signaled in this business, that's the language. Gloves in the ring, boots left behind, a hug with the man who stood next to him for decades. A wave to the people who came to watch him. Every single element of a farewell was right there, laid out like a checklist, and WWE's own programming leaned into it. While Lesnar himself never outright announced his retirement, the WWE commentary team alluded to Brock having retired. Subsequent WWE programming leaned into Brock having retired. And Raw general manager Adam Pearce also said that he'd filed retirement papers for the 10-time world champion. That's not fans reading into a moment. That's the company's own broadcast team, and an on-screen authority figure treating it as fact. Paperwork filed, done. Except it wasn't done. Brock returned to WWE just weeks later to attack Oba, and set up a rematch at Clash in Italy, which he won. Weeks, not years, not even a full season away. The gloves came back on, the boots went back on his feet. The guy who'd supposedly filed paperwork to leave the business was suddenly right back in the ring, going after the same opponent who just seemingly ended his career. That flip retirement to comeback in a matter of weeks is the single most important piece of context for understanding what just happened at SummerSlam. Because it means WWE and Lesnar himself have already shown they're willing to use the language and imagery of a real goodbye as a storytelling device, not necessarily as a literal announcement. Meltzer himself flagged this directly, noting that the term retired had been used extremely loosely in this whole storyline. So when Lesnar hugged Femi in the cell and called himself the past, longtime fans had every reason to feel a flicker of deja vu. They'd watched this exact sequence play out once already in 2026 alone. Gloves and boots became a hug and a microphone. The venue changed. The stakes got higher, hell in a cell instead of a standard match, a hometown crowd instead of a neutral building. But the shape of the story rhymed. There's also the matter of why Femi, specifically, keeps being the man standing across the ring when these moments happen. This isn't some random pairing. According to reporting following the WrestleMania loss to many, losing to Oba Femi seemed to be a natural passing of the torch, with Femi being one of the few names over the last decade labeled as the potential next Lesnar. WWE has been building Femi as a comparison point to Lesnar's own rise. And comparisons like that only get made about people the company believes can eventually fill that exact spot in the roster. That's what makes the Clash in Italy rematch and Lesnar's win there so significant in hindsight. He didn't just come back from a retirement, he came back and beat the guy who'd retired him. Evening the score before Hell in a Cell made it 2-1 in Femi's favor. That's not the behavior of a company quietly moving a star off the roster. That's a rivalry being built with real stakes on both sides, a rubber match, a decider. Something worth building an entire stadium show around, and build it they did. SummerSlam landing in Minneapolis wasn't a coincidence either. Brock was born in Webster, South Dakota, but became synonymous with Minnesota, having become an NCAA Division I champion during his time at the University of Minnesota, prior to signing with WWE in 2000. And SummerSlam 2026 taking place at Minneapolis's US Bank Stadium would serve as a homecoming for Lesnar. If you were going to write the final chapter of Brock Lesnar's story, you couldn't pick a better location. Home state, home crowd, the building sitting practically in the shadow of where his legend started. That's exactly why so many people assumed this was it. Brock Lesnar's emotional exit after SummerSlam had many fans convinced they had just witnessed the end of an era, with his post-match handshake, words of respect, and farewell-like gestures toward the crowd, quickly fueling speculation that the Beast incarnate had quietly retired from professional wrestling. The location fit, the opponent fit, the gestures fit, everything fit. Everything except for what was reportedly being said behind the scenes in the days leading up to that very match. Because while fans were connecting every dot toward a farewell, a completely separate version of this story was circulating among the people who actually shape WWE's creative direction. And that version doesn't end with Brock Lesnar riding into the sunset in his home state at all. Long before Hell in a Cell was even announced, this whole storyline had a name inside the industry. And it wasn't a secret. Dave Meltzer had been reporting since the tail end of 2025 that WWE was actively working on a Cena-style farewell run, not just for Lesnar, but for a small group of legends all at once. According to Meltzer, WWE has working plans for retirement tour for Brock Lesnar, AJ Styles, and potentially Chris Jericho if he decides to leave AEW for WWE. This wasn't a throwaway line either. Meltzer laid out exactly how confident that reporting was. There is a story going around that Lesnar will retire at SummerSlam 2026. Meltzer wrote, adding that Styles' retirement run is the most likely of the group, since the Phenomenal One has made it known that he would retire next year. Notice the distinction there. Styles had said it publicly, Lesnar hadn't. But the story about Lesnar's date was already circulating widely enough that Meltzer felt it was worth reporting even without direct confirmation from Lesnar himself. And the timing lined up with everything happening around him. Cageside Seats picked up on the same reporting, framing it as WWE having discussed scripting the end of an era. No confirmation of SummerSlam talk existed yet, but creative had supposedly discussed scripting the end of Brock Lesnar's career, with Meltzer reporting WWE has discussed plans for Lesnar's retirement. Discussed plans, scripted end. That's language you use about something with real weight behind it inside a company, not idle backstage chatter. Meltzer went further, connecting exactly why the SummerSlam date specifically kept coming up. There was a story going around that Lesnar would retire at SummerSlam 2026. And while he couldn't confirm that date, he'd heard at least a month prior that the working plans for 2026 would be retirement runs for Lesnar, Styles, and potentially Jericho if he signed, though he didn't get the impression it was locked in except for Styles. But the Lesnar name had been talked about, which is probably where the story came from. Read that carefully because it's important. Even the most connected reporter covering this business was drawing a line between this has been talked about internally and this is locked in and confirmed. Styles had crossed that line by saying it publicly himself. Lesnar hadn't, not once. Every single retirement beat in Brock Lesnar's 2026 has come from gestures. Gloves, boots, a hug, a microphone, never from the man's own mouth in plain language. That distinction matters even more once you stack it against Cena's comments. Remember, Cena wasn't some outside observer guessing at rumors. He just walked his own farewell tour. Match by match, city by city, all year. He knew what the shape of one of these runs looks like from the inside, having lived it. So when he specifically pointed to Minnesota and called it the place where Lesnar would go into the sunset, that wasn't a fan theory dressed up as insider knowledge. That was someone who just finished the exact same kind of send-off, recognizing the blueprint being built for someone else. And WWE leaned into that blueprint hard with the marketing. The company built SummerSlam's advertising specifically around the Hell in a Cell rematch, teasing it with ominous messaging aimed directly at Lesnar. Promotional material taunted, "Just you wait, Brock," warning he'd be locked in there with Obafemi at SummerSlam. That's not neutral advertising for a mid-card feud. That's the kind of language WWE uses when it wants an audience believing the stakes are as high as they can possibly get for one specific person. So for months, 3 separate signals all pointed the exact same direction. Meltzer's sourcing said a retirement run was being discussed at the company level. Cena's public comments named the location and the timeframe almost to the month. And WWE's own promotional language treated the Femi rematch like the biggest, most dangerous obstacle Lesnar had faced in years. Add in the visual from WrestleMania, the boots, the gloves, the hug with Heyman, and you had a company seemingly building toward one outcome from every possible angle. But reporting inside an organization like WWE rarely stays settled for long, especially with someone like Lesnar, who has never operated the way most WWE talent does. He doesn't tour the way Cena did, hitting dates every week for a full calendar year. He appears sporadically, negotiates his own schedule, and famously keeps his personal plans close to his chest. Even from people inside the company, that unpredictability is exactly why, as SummerSlam actually approached, the story that had felt locked in for months suddenly started to crack. Because right around the same time, WWE was airing that "Just You Wait, Brock" teaser. A different report started circulating from a completely different set of sources. People who talked directly to the company's current internal thinking, rather than reporting on plans discussed back in December. And what they were hearing sounded nothing like a farewell tour. Just days before Lesnar even stepped into Hell in a Cell, the story flipped. WrestleVotes, reporting through Fightful Select, put out an update that directly contradicted months of retirement talk. Despite there not being plans for Lesnar to retire this weekend, WrestleVotes Radio confirms that Obafemi is still being considered, the creative favorite to go over inside Hell in a Cell at SummerSlam. That's a significant detail on its own, the idea that even with Lesnar reportedly staying on, Femi was still expected to win the match. It meant WWE wasn't protecting Lesnar's undefeated or to set up one final glorious win before he walked away. They were willing to let him lose again, cleanly in his own hometown. In a Hell in a Cell match no less, specifically because they weren't treating this as his final moment. Once the match actually happened and Lesnar delivered that emotional farewell-style speech, the same source doubled down rather than backing off. WrestleVotes Radio on Fightful Select reported, "The feeling within WWE is that Lesnar will not retire after SummerSlam, but instead continue to wrestle beyond the marquee pay-per-view. Think about what that means next to everything from the ring." Fans watched a hug, a raised arm, and a man calling himself the past. And within hours, the outlet with a direct line to internal WWE thinking said that same man is expected to keep wrestling, not retiring. Not stepping away for an extended break, continuing. Other outlets picked up the exact same reporting almost immediately, which tells you this wasn't a single unconfirmed leak. It was reported on Fightful Select that he is not expected to retire after his match against Obafemi at SummerSlam 2026 Night 1. Multiple wrestling news operations were independently confirming the same internal sentiment, which is usually a sign the sourcing runs deep rather than coming from one person's guess. And then came a detail that reframed the entire timeline going forward. It was even noted by one source they would be surprised if Brock didn't step away following SummerSlam before resurfacing ahead of WrestleMania 43 in Saudi Arabia. That's not Lesnar isn't retiring, that's something more specific and honestly more interesting. It suggests Lesnar might take time away from television, exactly like he did after WrestleMania 42, only to reappear for the next mega show on the calendar. The pattern from earlier in the year vanish, then return weeks or months later, showing up again as the expected blueprint for what comes next. This is where Triple H's press conference comments finally click into place. Remember, at that Night 1 post-show, he didn't confirm the goodbye. He referenced the earlier disappearing act. You saw Brock in whatever way he retired a few months ago and then come back and do this. He was telling reporters in real time, hours after the emotional scene in the ring, that this exact cycle had already happened once and strongly hinting it could happen again. Triple H had also addressed this days before the show even happened, during a nationally televised appearance discussing the rumors directly. Ahead of SummerSlam, WWE Chief Content Officer Paul Levesque addressed the retirement rumors during an appearance on ESPN's First Take, making it clear that Brock's future in WWE is entirely his own decision. His exact phrasing on that broadcast put the decision squarely in Lesnar's hands. Rather than the company's, it's really in his court as to what he wants to do. Triple H said, also noting that Brock had something to prove at SummerSlam by returning to his home state of Minnesota inside Hell in a Cell against Oba. That's not the language of a company preparing to announce a farewell. That's the language of a company saying, we don't actually know and neither do you, because only one man decides this. And Triple H doubled down on that idea elsewhere, pointing directly at Lesnar's personality as the reason nobody, including WWE's own leadership, could predict his next move with certainty. I've known him personally for that 20+ years. The one thing that I know more than anything else about Brock Lesnar is gonna do whatever Brock Lesnar wants to do. Paul Levesque stated on ESPN First Take. There's one more layer buried in that same reporting that reshapes how you should watch every Femi appearance going forward. While they are on-screen rivals, behind the scenes Lesnar is actually mentoring Obafemi. WWE Chief Content Officer Triple H revealed this week. That single fact recontextualizes the entire rivalry. The hug in the ring, the praise on the microphone. Calling Femi the future, none of that was purely a storyline beat. If the mentorship is real behind the curtain too, Lesnar handing him a moment inside Hell in a Cell starts to look less like a man closing his own book, and more like a veteran actively building the next chapter of somebody else's career, while keeping his own options completely open. So where does that actually leave things? Not with a confirmed retirement, not with a confirmed comeback tour either. It leaves things exactly where Lesnar has always preferred them. Unclear, unresolved, and entirely on his own terms. Here's where the story actually sits right now. Nobody, not the reporters, not WWE's own leadership, has given a straight yes or no on whether Brock Lesnar wrestles again. And that ambiguity isn't an accident. It's become the defining feature of this entire year for him. The uncertainty has real consequences for the people around him too. Obafemi, the man who just delivered the biggest win of his career against a legend, still doesn't know if he'll get a fourth match in this rivalry, or if Hell in a Cell was the true final word. He went from being handed the loss at WrestleMania to winning the rubber match on the biggest stage of the summer, and reports suggest the mentorship between them continues. Regardless of what Lesnar decides next, that means Femi's own trajectory is tied, at least partly, to a decision only one man is going to make on his own schedule, with no obligation to announce it to anyone. There's also the matter of what WWE does. With the SummerSlam moment itself going forward, the company let its broadcast lean into every signal of finality. The hug, the raised arm, the framing of Femi as the future while Lesnar called himself the past. The exact same playbook used after WrestleMania 42. If the pattern holds, expect silence for a stretch. Maybe weeks, maybe months, followed by exactly the kind of reappearance sources have already flagged. One source said they wouldn't be surprised if Lesnar stepped away following SummerSlam, before resurfacing ahead of WrestleMania 43 in Saudi Arabia. If that happens, Minneapolis won't have been the ending. It'll have been another chapter break, in a story Lesnar has now used twice in a single calendar year. That doesn't mean the retirement conversation disappears. Meltzer's original reporting about a broader push. Lesnar alongside Styles and possibly Jericho, all walking similar farewell paths, hasn't been retracted, just complicated. Styles remains the one name in that group who's publicly committed to a 2026 exit. Jericho's status still depends on whether he actually resigns with WWE at all, and Lesnar sits in the middle of that group. As the only one whose next move nobody, even the company employing him, seems fully able to predict. What's clear is that Lesnar's career has now produced two moments this year that looked, sounded, and felt like a genuine goodbye. The boots and gloves left in the ring after Femi's first win, and now the hug in the microphone after Hell in a Cell. Both times, the emotional weight was real enough to convince commentators, broadcast teams, and thousands of fans in the building that they'd just watched history close. Both times, reporting closest to WWE's actual internal plans said otherwise within days. That pattern is worth sitting with because it tells you something about how Lesnar's final chapter is likely to actually unfold whenever it truly happens. It probably won't look like Cena's farewell tour, with dates announced months in advance, and a clear final match circled on a calendar. It's going to look exactly like this. A big emotional scene that convinces the world it's over, followed by silence, followed by a report saying it isn't, followed eventually by his return in some other building on some other night when he decides he's ready. For now, the facts on the table are these. He lost to Femi in his hometown, inside a structure built for punishment in front of the people who watched him become a champion decades ago. He called himself the past on live television, and the people who actually run WWE's creative direction, along with the sources closest to those conversations, are telling anyone who will listen that this almost certainly wasn't the last time we see him in a WWE ring. Whether that changes depends entirely on one man, operating on a timeline nobody else gets to see. Brock Lesnar has spent this entire year making the wrestling world believe he was finished, twice. And coming back both times, the retirement conversation isn't dead. It's just sitting exactly where it's always sat with him. One hug, one microphone, and one disappearing act away from becoming real, whenever he finally decides it is.